and welcome to Camino Masterclasses, where we hear top tips and advice about doing the Camino de Santiago from those that know it best. I am your host, Freddie Bowen, and I work for Camino Pilgrim at the UK's Camino Association, the Confraternity of St. James, a charity dedicated to providing information and support to anyone interested in the Camino de Santiago. Today, we are talking about the Camino del Norte, and we are delighted to be joined by the author to Cicerone's guidebook to this route, as well as the Camino Primitivo, Dave Whitson. Dave is actually a high school history teacher in Portland, Oregon, and a graduate of the University of Washington. He made his first pilgrimage in 2002 on the Camino Francés and was inspired to return with a group of his students, which he did in 2004. He also led a total of 7 student pilgrimage trips, including 5 on the Camino, 4 on the Francés and 1 on the Norte, and 2 on the Via Francigena. In addition, he's also made long-distance treks in Norway on the Pilgrim Road to Nidaros, in England along the Pilgrim's Way to Canterbury, and in Turkey on the Lycian Way. All told, he has walked roughly 1,000 kilometers on pilgrim roads in Europe, and Dave first walked the Camino del Norte and Camino Primitivo in 2008. He returned with a group in 2009 and then rewalked it in 2011 to ensure up-to-date route information for the guidebook co-written with Laura Perezzoli, now in its 3rd edition and republished in 2019. Dave will be taking us through the Camino del Norte for roughly the first half of this hour, after which we'll open up for a Q&A session to take us up to the hour mark. For those of you joining us live, you can submit your questions at any time from now, either in chat, and we'll come to them in the second half, or by using the raise hand button. Dave might throw out some questions to you mid-presentation, though, for quick responses, so be ready. We'll get through as many questions as we can in the Q&A. In case we don't have time, we'll make sure that you get emailed an answer. And a recording of today will also be sent out to you all afterwards. Adding to the expertise today, we are also blessed to be joined by Keys Hudson of just outside Helotes, Texas, who walked the Norte in 2019 using Dave's very guidebook. Huge welcome to both of you. Thank you so much for doing this for us. Take it away, Dave.
Thank you very much, Freddie. It's an honor to be here. It's significant shoes to fill, following on the footsteps of John Brierley and Bibi and Anne last time around. But it's a pleasure to be here. I'm particularly happy to be supporting the Confraternity of St. James, which was a critical resource for me when I made my first pilgrimage in 2002. I had the guidebook that you produce, and I made full use of your website. So I'm pleased to be here. And I'm also okay with being back on Zoom. Freddie mentioned I'm a high school teacher, and I spent an entire year from March 2020 to March 2021 teaching classes on Zoom, and we're back in person now with masks on all the time. But it's nice to be able to connect with all of you here today. I am currently visiting family as it's the holiday week here for Thanksgiving, and you may hear some eruptions of dog barking in the background at some point, but just carry on. We'll get through it together. So I'm going to bring up some slides, and we'll have some slides up for the first half of this presentation, and then we'll get rid of those in the second half. And let me bring you through my hopes for today and then the program as a whole. So what I want to do is start off by giving you an introduction to the Camino del Norte in 3 minutes or less. And I want to do that because I have done already a full presentation for Cicerone that's kind of the basics of the Camino del Norte. And I get particularly indignant when we bring a guest speaker to my school and you can tell they're just giving out the same canned presentation that they've given out a million times before. So if you want like a detailed introduction, that video is there. I'm not going to duplicate it because you all are here for this and maybe you've already seen the other one. So I'm going to give you a quick introduction, and then I'm going to talk about the Camino del Norte from a few different angles. And what's inspiring this is really thinking about what I suspect is true for many of you if you were in a position of considering the Camino del Norte now. You are probably veterans of the Camino Francés. You have probably walked a pilgrimage before, and now you're thinking about the Norte as a next step. And so I want you to think about the Norte, and I also want to help you think about what it's like to go back again and again and again, and how things change and how they stay the same. And so that's where those thematic sections come in. I want to talk about the role of myth and the ways that we anticipate myth on the Camino Francés and how that shifts on the Norte. I want to talk specifically about what feels different, what people might warn you is different about the Camino del Norte, and then what my perception is of the reality on the ground. I want to talk about choice, because there's abundant choice on the Camino del Norte. It's one of the highlights and also one of the complexities associated with it. And so I want to have you think about that a little bit. And then I'll talk a little bit about the ongoing COVID impact. Nothing too big, but some stuff specific to the Norte. I was back on the Norte over the last summer to walk from Gijón to Santiago after I was on the Le Puy route. And so I have some news from the ground and also from my conversations and emails with albergue owners. So we'll end with that. And then I hope lots of your questions, and I hope that you will feel welcome to submit questions at any point, and Freddie will be compiling them and bringing them to bear in hopefully the last half hour or so, provided I don't blather on too long. So that's the plan. And let's jump into it with that rapid fire overview. So the Camino del Norte runs across the northern coast of Spain. It picks up at the border with France, so Hendaye in France and Irún in Spain. And you could even start walking from further back. It's quite easy and pleasant to walk, for example, from the Biarritz airport or the town of Bayonne, if you were to fly there from the UK. And you can walk along the coast through France and then cross the border and merrily continue on from Irún. And the Camino del Norte continues westward along the coast all the way until the town of Ribadeo, at which point it cuts inland and it will then proceed towards Santiago de Compostela. Many pilgrims will combine the Norte with the Primitivo, and you can see that it splits off in the town of Villaviciosa and then goes through Oviedo. And there's now this alternative as well to continue along the Mar and then follow the Inglés into Santiago. So there are options, but we're just mostly talking about the Camino del Norte today. The history of this is, complicated. What I want to focus on is just a very small part of it. If we go back to 722, so we're going back a few years now, when the Islamic conquest of Spain was unfolding, about a decade in at that point, had swept across the Iberian Peninsula, there was kind of a last stand among a Christian kingdom in northwest Spain, in the region of Asturias. And it was led by Pelayo. And Pelayo, at the Battle of Covadonga in 722, kind of turned back the tide. And Covadonga is a small place that is actually accessible by a local pilgrimage that you can make cutting off of the Camino del Norte if you're so inclined. But it's a symbolic place in the history of Spain and of Asturias, this place where the story of the Reconquista begins. And that's important because it sets in motion the development of Oviedo as a critical pilgrimage point. And Oviedo becomes, right alongside Santiago de Compostela, a central hub for some of the most significant relics in Spain, most significantly the Sudarium de Oviedo, the shroud that the story goes is believed to have been wrapped around Jesus's head at his death. And this gave way to the line that whoever goes to St. James and not to the Savior visits the servant and misses the master. That is to say, the expectation of pilgrims was to go and visit the relics of Jesus in Oviedo and then continue on to the relics of James in Santiago. And that is why the Camino Primitivo came about as the first of the ways of St. James through Spain, linking Oviedo to Santiago. And again, we're not talking about the Primitivo today, but it is possible to detour through Oviedo and back to the Norte. But even if you don't, it is that history that brought pilgrims to this route for a couple of reasons. One, because as violence or as the perception of instability was greater further south, some pilgrims would be inclined to follow this coastal road that seemed more protected. And also because pilgrims would want to go to Oviedo, so they might, especially if they were coming from the UK or farther north, sail, make landfall, and then proceed. And they might make landfall at all different points along the northern coast, visit Oviedo, and then continue either along the coast or further south. And many would detour from the Francés to come to Oviedo. The quick rapid fire overview of the sections on the Camino del Norte goes through 4 different autonomous regions. So the first region is in the Basque Country. And as you walk along here, I think many on the Norte, many fans of the Norte would say this is the most stunning and scenic part. It's hilly, it's strenuous, and it's lovely. And you're often on these hills overlooking the coast. You descend cobblestones into villages along the way. You have San Sebastián, which is one of the most beautiful cities in Europe. And you have other assorted smaller towns like Zarautz and Zumaya that are lovely in their own way. And as you continue on through Cantabria, the terrain smooths out. And so if the Basque Country sounds too strenuous, you have Cantabria to look forward to, where it is much flatter, much more manageable, though certainly with some hills that will tire you out at points, and lovely, lovely beach towns along the way, like Laredo, where you pick up a ferry at the end of the beach and travel across to Santoña. And you have a number of impressive towns with notable architecture, like Castro Urdiales, where you have the ruins of a castle and this marvelous Gothic church in the center of the town. And you again have wonderful walking along the coast, leading to this viewpoint near Somo on the way towards Santander. And Santander is a highlight, and you have a ferry across into the city along the way. From Cantabria, you cross into Asturias, where it gets a little bit more rugged again. You're still often on the coast for significant stretches. And you have a town like Avilés, which is near the center, which has a marvelous pedestrian center. And then you can continue on westward through Asturias after the Camino Primitivo splits off to the south. And you have port towns like Luarca, and at points, hilly walks like above Novellana, if you choose this variant. And all along the way, it's just stunning, stunning coastal scenery. And finally, as you cross into Galicia, those who have walked the Camino Francés will see some walking that is familiar to you from your experiences on the Camino Francés, the eucalyptus trees, the rolling hills, and you'll see wonderful church architecture as in Sobrado dos Montes. And of course, just like on the Francés, you finish up in Santiago de Compostela. So that's a quick overview. And with that, I want to move into some themes. But if you have questions about any of that, pop them into chat, and Freddie will get them to me later. The first thing I want to talk about big picture is walking without the anticipation, expectation, and burden of myth. And a quick question, if you are inclined to engage on chat right now, I'm wondering what's a place on the Camino Francés that carries some larger mythic or symbolic significance for pilgrims that stands out to you from your experience as a place that maybe you were looking forward to, that you had read about, that you prepared for mentally, knowing that this would be a significant part of your experience on the Camino Francés. Yeah, Carlita, that is probably number one, top of the list for many, many pilgrims, the Cruz de Ferro. That does not surprise me that is the first. And maybe that will be the only response because it is so definitive for pilgrims. When I think about this question, my mind goes to a bunch of different places, some of them serious and heavy. Yeah, Roncesvalles, that descent into the Abbey, the first view is stunning, Louise. My mind goes in a lot of different directions. So I was thinking on that first walk of the statue of the Virgin as you finally get high enough and you see the valley below. And you think about the crossing of the Alto de Perdón and the sculptures at the top and the windmill. I think about the wine fountain, the anticipation headed to the wine fountain or to the chickens in Santo Domingo de la Calzada. I think about the expectations pilgrims have as they cross through the Meseta. There's this psyching up process headed into the Meseta, that you're going to have this mental grind, this challenge, but maybe the epiphany that comes as well. And there's that expectation going in. And then, of course, there's the Cruz de Ferro. And I think about Osobrero, and particularly hitting Osobrero in the fog and seeing the peyotas just sort of breaking through in places and the charged aspect of that. And then finally, the views from Monte de Gozo. And so maybe you have other ideas that come to mind. But those are some that come to my mind that I anticipated, that I read about, that I arrived just like fully charged for what those represented as a pilgrim on the way. Meanwhile, on the Camino del Norte, like I went through this process beforehand. What are the places charged with, sort of mythic significance? And maybe the albergue in Güemes, it's well known on the Norte for hospitality, for the dynamic that exists there. One of those places that is donation based, that has communal meals, that has a really engaged host and all kinds of volunteers who help to staff it. But I don't know that there are other places that are imbued with that sort of modern myth that so many places on the Camino Francés are. And I don't think that's a bad thing either, but I think it's a different thing. And again, if you're thinking about that second pilgrimage or going out beyond the Francés, one of the things that is complicated about that, or I think worth considering, is these dueling aspects, the anticipation, the expectation, and the burden. Because one trap people fall into sometimes on the Francés is automatically assuming that, like, when I get to the Cruz de Ferro, something important is going to happen to me. And maybe it does, and maybe it doesn't. On the Norte, you're freed of that. There are certainly places that you will visit in anticipation. You'll probably be excited to get to San Sebastián and Bilbao and to smaller towns like Santillana del Mar. But you will also be able to sort of craft your own myth, the stories that you will tell that are your own stories. And you will walk through each town with a fresh mind and an open heart. And that can be hard because sometimes we benefit from the signposting, from knowing what to anticipate. It puts us in a particular mental spot. But when I think about my experiences on the Norte, I didn't have to get very far through my photo archives to find places that I think about with incredible love and appreciation for the experiences I had there. And these are just a few of them, and I won't walk you through them by name, but you'll be able to create your own stories on the Norte or any other route you walk in a way that maybe you don't on the Francés, where some of them are scripted and you anticipate them and you expect them in a particular way. And that leads to the second piece, the idea of walking a different Camino, but also wanting to preserve and protect some things that are sacred and special about the pilgrimage experience. You leave the Camino Francés, but you don't want to leave the Camino. And I think that stops people sometimes from branching out because they think that there's so much that's special about the Francés that they worry it won't exist on the others. And certainly you will lose some things on the Francés or when you leave the Francés. Here are a few things that I hear sometimes about the Norte that I think about. I hear concerns about the Norte because it is more touristed, because you won't just be around pilgrims. And it's certainly true to some degree that on the first half of the Norte, as you walk from Irún and from San Sebastián in particular, over towards Gijón, you will be walking through places where maybe some of your British peers are traveling over the summer to hang out on the beaches and to relax in that context. And so you will be immersed at times among non-pilgrims. And for some, that's a turnoff. I think people also hear that more of the churches are locked. And I think that's a common concern across Spain. If you want churches to be open all the time, go to France. You'll have a different experience there. But on the Camino Francés too, because of the greater pilgrim traffic, because of the greater infrastructure, more places are unlocked. And so that's a reality at points on the Norte, that more of the churches will be locked. And then there's also the concern about community, that of course Francés is overflowing with community, maybe to a fault at points. But you can always find a circle of pilgrims to hang out with. And so there is this fear that you go to a less traveled route and you don't get the same kind of pilgrim community experience that you might on the Norte or on the Francés. And so there's this fear. So a few thoughts on that. One, I think is really important to note is that on the Camino del Norte now, there is sufficient infrastructure and enough variety of albergues, both in terms of kinds of albergues and locations of albergues, that you actually can get out of the tourist centers if you don't want them. For some people, getting to overnight in San Sebastián as a pilgrim is a blast, and they go and they eat tapas all night and they love it. For others, it's a nice place to visit, but they wouldn't want to stay there. And so you have options. So in this first stretch in particular, through the Basque Country, which is more touristed, in part because it is lovely, you can just keep walking if you want. And so you don't have to stay in San Sebastián. You can go to a private pilgrim albergue in Orio. And if Zarautz is too busy for you, there's a lovely pilgrim albergue in Getaria. And if you don't want to stay in Deba, which is a smaller town, but again, beaches and lots of crowds, you walk 5 kilometers more, you get to Izarbide, this albergue in the middle of nowhere. There's a grassy hill with a view. There are little piglets running around and squealing, and it's fantastic. So you have options, and you can leave the tourist centers after a visit and go back to peace and quiet and being with pilgrims. The second is, yes, a number of churches are closed, but the churches that are open are often quite spectacular and wonderful. I think there are some marvelous cloisters along the way, some impressive sculpture, and I think in particular about Zenaritsa, which is a monastery with a pilgrim albergue fairly early in the walk. And I think about Sobrado dos Montes, which in a non-COVID year also has an albergue within the monastery. And there are these wonderful places along the way where you will still feel that connection to the sacred that interior of a church offers. And the third, well, there's Sobrado. I was just in Sobrado over the summer and I was blown away again by how spectacular that place is. The point about community I want to highlight is similar to what I made about tourism. Once you get out of the tourist centers, you can find your pilgrims. And there are now enough pilgrims on the Norte, especially in the summer, that you will find your people. And there is this growing concentration of donativo-based albergues, especially donativos with communal meals as you get into the second part of the Norte outside of the more expensive Basque Country, where you can be surrounded by people over a dinner. And we know that so often that is, where the magic happens on pilgrimage, is at those communal meals where you're talking about the day together. And so while you have to work a little bit harder, especially in the cities, especially in the more touristed areas, there are communities. And I think there's something really nice about downsizing and not having quite so many pilgrims around. You recognize more and more of the faces as you proceed. And it's just as powerful as you might have come to associate the Francés with. I'll come back to that later. The third section is the joy and complexity of choice on pilgrimage. And this is probably the biggest one. And what I want to really talk about is some of the tensions bound up in choice. So another question, if any of you are out there on chat, when on the Camino Francés, do you remember that you needed to make a decision between 2 separate route options, where you were really thinking about, like, God, I could go 2 different ways, and I don't know what the best route is. I don't know what's right for me. There aren't nearly as many of them on the Francés, but there are a few prominent ones. Certainly the first day, you may have had to decide whether you were feeling up to the route Napoleon or if you were going to go through Valcarlos. And you might have faced this dilemma in particular in the Meseta, whether you go through El Burgo Ranero or whether you deviate to Casadilla de los Armenios. You might have thought about it with Samos and whether to take on the additional kilometers for Samos or to go straight to Sarria. But the other question I want you to think about is how do you decide in those moments between where to go or where not to go? Because the reality on the Norte is you are going to have to make a lot more decisions because there's so much choice. I'm not going to go all the way through the book, but I'm just going to point out that to varying degrees, if you just look at the first 3 stages of the Norte, you already have decisions to make. Significant decisions on the first stage, and even on the third stage. Whereas on the second, it's smaller. It's just the final approach to the final town in that stage, Zarautz. But over and over and over again on the Camino del Norte, you have options. And this brings up a lot of different issues. Sometimes the choice is obvious. So this is a coastal option to Pendueles, where the alternative is walking on the road the whole way. There's nothing scenic. There are really no towns. There's no good argument to walk the official Camino along the road. You should follow the coast to Pendueles. Sometimes it's obvious. Sometimes it seems obvious. So for example, that shot I showed you before of the rock strata, that's the Basque Coast Geopark. It's in stage 3 of the Norte. The alternative is following the official route through Itziar. This is one of the most common situations you face on the Norte, where you have to decide between the more scenic coastal approach, where you largely leave towns behind, where you might be leaving behind what is, the historic official Camino, because you want the prettier route, maybe less pavement, maybe longer and more strenuous. This route is certainly more strenuous along the coast, but it's absolutely stunning. And so one of the things that I find myself wrestling a lot as a pilgrim, as someone who wants to be walking with intentionality, is this tension between wanting the scenic beauty and also thinking about the towns and villages that have that historical connection, that have residents now who have a passion for the pilgrimage coming through their community, and trying to figure out in my mind how to reconcile those two things. When to opt for natural splendor and when to go through the place with the historic tie. And I think that that's a question to ask yourself as you walk on the Norte. How do you balance those? Sometimes you have two equally good options, and it can be really hard to decide. Like sometimes there's this issue of FOMO, right? Like you pick the wrong one and now you're nervous, now you're agonizing. It's not excitement about possibility. It's how do I pick the right one? And there's not a wrong option. When you're walking towards Cadavedo later in the Norte, you can take the lower level route, and you have some wonderful trail walking along ups and downs through the woods, and you have some nice villages along the way, like Novellana and Santa Marina. Or you can take the high level route, which just has, in clear weather, absolutely stunning views. Another option is, how comfortable are you with uncertainty, with a lack of waymarks? So for example, one of the best walks that I've found on the Norte is not actually technically on the Norte. The walk from Santander to Bu de Pielagos, so leaving Santander, is one of those walks with just way too much pavement, not a lot of scenery. But you can follow the coast and it's spectacular. Are you comfortable with that? Are you okay with leaving behind the waymarks and again, that sort of official itinerary in order to try something different? Because there are more and more of those options where you can download a GPS track online and you can sort of customize and create your own approach, which is really nice and maybe also really scary. There's also, again, a similar question, this tension for me of, there's this town Liendo, it's on the way to Laredo. Just through circumstance, I ended up staying there multiple times. It's lovely and it's pleasant. It's a really nice pilgrim community. And then there's this just spectacular alternative that you can follow. It's a ton of work, and for some people, it's really terrifying. There's a spot where you might feel like you could go tumbling quite a ways. But look at that view. It's amazing. And I walked it last time, and I think I'll walk it almost every time moving forward. And yet part of me is really sad about the loss, about not going back through a place that I have this affection for based on the times that I've spent there before. But what's also exciting is like every time I go back to the Norte, and I have been there multiple times since that overview that Freddie provided, like I've back and back again and again and again. So every time I go back, there's something new. So this last time was the first time that I deviated from the Norte, from the village of El Pito, to walk just couple kilometers downhill to this fishing port village of Cudiero, which is just spectacular. It's just such a wonderful, perfect little village that I had never been to before. And so that was invigorating. And similarly, I'd never followed the historic route from Ribadeo, because if you walk to Ribadeo, you'll know that there is a very long bridge that you cross, and it is a modern construction. The historic route would have gone through Vegadeo, and that has been carefully recovered. And there are a couple of albergues along the way with wonderful hospitality, including this adorable dog. And Vegadeo loves pilgrims. Waymarks are everywhere. They have a free t-shirt for pilgrims. They're doing everything they can to get people there. It was my first time. So despite having gone back to the Norte again and again and again, there's new things to discover every time. And you could go there and you could rewalk it multiple times and have radically different experiences because of that abundance of alternatives. A couple of other pieces about choice. You can walk through Bilbao, or you can avoid the city. I found this alternative that has the best views that you can get of the Guggenheim without ever actually going to the Guggenheim. So you can circumvent the city if you want, but you can also take the longest route leaving Bilbao that goes through urban sprawl. And for a lot of pilgrims, this is undesirable, right? Like going into Burgos, there's that agonizing walk if you follow the industrial road, and everyone just feels terrible by the end of it. But I think a lot about Rebecca Scott, who has written a wonderful book, and she likes to point out how pilgrimage, you take the good with the bad. And it can be really tempting. And I'm not judging any pilgrim who decides to skip through the least scenic parts or take some more scenic alternative. But I think about the beauty that I saw on the day that I walked this long route leaving Bilbao, and what it brought to my pilgrimage that I didn't have otherwise. And I think about the walk from Gijón to Avilés, which is frankly the ugliest stage on the Norte. Not every stage can be above average. This is below average. But I think about what it was like walking through this industrial center. And I think about these flashes of beauty that I saw on even the worst walk. And I think about how walking for miles, for kilometers, for hours, through less beautiful terrain, along highways with trucks plowing past me, shaped my thinking on that day and reshaped my thinking on the days that followed. And it reinforced for me that the hazard of choice sometimes, that when you take the prettier option, you miss out on an aspect of pilgrimage that can be quite significant. And so these are all things that I think you need to think about when you pursue a pilgrimage that has so many choices. And about that aspect of pilgrimage that needs to be intentional. Thinking about what you want, what you're looking for from each day, what you need, and what each of those options has to offer. There's a new alternative approach to finish the Norte that saves you from having to go onto the Camino Francés until like the last 7-8 kilometers. You're also walking along the highway for a lot of it. Is it worth trading off crowds for this? What mindset do you want at the end? Others say you can follow minor roads in between if you're comfortable without waymarks. So there's choice. What do you want? A few notes on COVID, because I'm already 2 minutes over. So I'll wrap this up in just a couple minutes. A few pictures from over the summer. I laughed when I saw this sign. I don't know that you could have fit a second person in there, but they're taking precautions. All of the bars were closed off, so you couldn't belly up to the bar, but there were tables and chairs right next to the bars. The main things that I want to say about COVID are that are kind of specific to the Norte. One, there were some seasonal shutdowns this year. So in the Basque Country, it was really hard to find pilgrim beds. I don't expect that to be a long-term situation. So I don't, as of now, see long-term significant albergue shutdowns on the Norte. There were a number of places that gradually reopened this year, and that's an encouraging sign. There are going to be other albergues that have been sold or will be sold. Certainly, some people have come out of this in worse for the wear, but I suspect that most of those will be open again, as is true with Cabo Redondo, where Albergue Izara has already reopened. So I suspect that the albergue capacity next year will not be radically different from a couple of years ago. Most albergues that reopened this year, even with significantly reduced capacity, still did not increase the price per bed or per room, though I certainly could have understood if they did, operating on 50% capacity or closing down shared rooms in order to make them private. But they stuck with their rates, which is noteworthy to me. And I see more tourist hostels opening. So places where you can get a bed, but it's a higher rate and it's open to non-pilgrims. That's more common right now on the Norte than it has been in the past. And that might be a model that continues as albergue owners try to figure out how to navigate this financial insecurity. But every time I make a prediction, maybe this is true for you as well, every time I've tried to make a prediction about what's going to happen next during the pandemic, I have been badly wrong. So I have no idea. But current signs through this year are pretty positive that we are in a position to bounce back. And I think a lot of albergue owners have just been hoping to weather the storm this year, make it to next year, and hope that the pilgrims return. So that is my spiel, and thank you for sitting through it. And I'm now going to pitch it back to Freddie, and I look forward to fielding any and all questions from you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. That was great. I have only walked the first week of the Norte, but having just watched that, I'm desperate to go back. So I might start planning that once I get off this call. We do have some questions. Firstly, from Charles. Charles is walking in mid-March. He wants to know what to expect from open accommodation and weather.
And let me pause here because I have one misstep there. I did not pull in officially keys, and I want to pull in keys because
yes,
I have some backup here for this this next round of conversation. I think it's always important when you're asking questions about pilgrimage to not rely on the word of a single person, even if they happen to have walked multiple times, right? Every one of our experience,
absolutely.
Every experience is so different. So Keys, welcome on board. Thank you for being here. Can you give a quick background on your Norte experience?
My Norte, you brought back a lot of memories of the Norte. And two things I would comment on was Guimas. That was an incredible experience. I arrived in time for a pilgrim snack, which was a fantastic soup with other pilgrims, and met Padre Bustio, who is a legend there. The other one that reminded me, I was talking about decisions. And I will confess, I took the urban route out of Bilbao, and my decision was based entirely upon wanting to take the floating bridge across to Portugalete. And then I was wonderfully surprised the next morning. I stayed in Portugalete to find a people mover take me all the way up the first hill. So those are memories you brought back. And the Norte is truly a wonderful walk. And listening to you now, I'm going to have to do it again.
That bridge is fascinating. Yeah, there's I'll try to bring up a picture of it later, but it's yeah, if you Google Portugalete Bridge, you'll see it's marvelous, and yeah, well worth it. So thank you for being here, Keys. Keys, when did you walk? What month?
2019. I started on the 1st of June and finished on the 17th of July. I had 6 rest days along the way there.
All right. So this first question you can't help out as much with, and I can't hit it perfectly either. So the question about what to expect in March. So I have walked on the Norte every month from May through September. And I have also been on the Norte for a brief stretch, December to January one year. These weather questions are so hard because December, January, when I was there, it was bright sunshine every day. It was incredible. And I was back there over the summer in August, and it was raining almost every day. And we know, of course, that climate change is making historic patterns less and less reliable. My main suggestions are twofold. One, with regards to weather, expect that it's going to be wet. Expect that it's going to be wet a lot and probably breezy. And, wind plus rain makes ponchos a less ideal choice. So you're going to want to make sure that you have good rain gear. And then you're also going to want to make sure that you're tracking the seasonal openings and closings of albergues. In the Basque Country, a lot of the albergues are summer only, especially the municipal ones. And so that's going to be a consideration for you early on. So track those, make sure that they're open. But then on the flip side, the good news is that there are a lot of the hotels that remain open in March aren't able to charge as much because not nearly as many people want to go to the coast that time of year. So you're going to be able to get lower rates on hotel rooms at that point. And often you can get really surprisingly affordable hotel rooms. I'm talking 16 to 28, 30 euros for a room. I even got a couple of those this last summer. So you will have good options.
Fabulous, thank you. We have a question, well, more of a statement from Cindy. She says she's concerned about day one from Irun to San Sebastian. I'm guessing about terrain. What advice, reassurance can you give her?
Keys, what was your day walking like?
I'm glad you asked. That was my fifth Camino, and every first day is challenging, but that was the mother of all first days. And it was a beautiful sunny day. So when I believe the first 10 kilometers get you to the chapel. And shortly after that, you make a choice of the upper route or the lower route, where you can stay at 200 meters, walk around the back of the hill or the mountain, and then get to San Sebastian. It was too pretty to pass up. And so I took the other route that went up another 500 meters, I believe, something like that. And by the time I got to San Sebastian, I was absolutely legless, but I would not trade it for anything. I checked in at the room in the city albergue, sat down in the easy chair to take my boots off before climbing into my bunk, and took a 2-hour nap with my boots still on. But I don't say this to discourage, because every step of it was worth it. Absolutely. Yeah.
I love that walk so much. And I do think it is analogous to the crossing of the Pyrenees on the Francés. It is strenuous and demanding. It has 2 ups and downs instead of 1, because around the 15-kilometer mark in the middle, you descend down to Pasajes de San Juan, you take the small ferry across, and then you climb back up, including some steps to a lighthouse. So it is a tiring walk. So a few thoughts on that. One, if you have time and you're in a position where you're trying to walk your way back into shape, that can be a really good situation to start in France and to walk from Bayonne, where it is flat almost all the way. And so you can walk a few days, build up your leg strength, and feel a little bit more confident as you hit that ascent out of Irun. So that's an option. The second thing is you absolutely can break up the walk in Pasajes de San Juan. And the stage goes, about 25 kilometers from Irun to San Sebastian, but Pasajes de San Juan is about 15 kilometers away. And so there's an albergue there that is open in season. It's not very big, but you have some options. I have taken the bus from Pasajes when I was scouting and I needed to go back through this route 3 different times. So I would walk to Pasajes, bus back, walk to Pasajes, walk bus back. And so you can catch the bus there. Sometimes there are Airbnb options in Pasajes. So if you're nervous, take it easy. And another option that I think is really tempting is, if you are excited about San Sebastian, get a room there for 3 nights. Wake up in San Sebastian, leave your backpack, take the Eusko train, the light rail, to Irun, walk from Irun without your pack to Pasajes, go back to San Sebastian, spend the night, come back without your pack the next day, complete the walk to San Sebastian. So you have options if you're nervous. I would say if you feel it all up to it physically, make that high level walk, because it's spectacular, and like Keys, you will remember it.
I would add, if I sounded discouraging, I was 76 years old when I did that first day. So, most people would be a lot more fit than I am.
And I have done that in blazing sunshine. I have done that in complete cloud cover the whole way. I have done that walk where we were in dense clouds until we got to the very top, and suddenly it was like we were standing above the ocean. All 3 of those were awesome. So for me, obviously, if it were raining and frigid and cold, then maybe not the best walk. But in every other regard, I have loved it regardless of the conditions.
Absolutely. Okay. Going to the other end of the route, we have Robert asking about the section from Ribadeo to Santiago and its refugios.
Yeah, Keys, did you walk the Norte all the way through?
I did, and I took the extension that you don't join the Francis quite as early. The last day on the Norte before it joined the Francis, I did not see another human being until I got to where it joined. And I was looking for an arrow on the highway as I approached there, and I saw someone with a backpack go across the road, about 100 meters past the road. And I realized that was the Camino Francés. I walked there and looked left, and there was a horde descending on me. There was a ton of pilgrims thereafter.
I had the same experience this past summer. What do you recall about like the albergue situation from Ribadeo onward? What stood out to you along that stretch?
I wish I had finished rereading my journals now, but I do remember one was very modern, and the rooms were color coded. So you had a key that got you in. I don't remember where that was, but I do remember walking further into the village for dinner and meeting another pilgrim who was 2 years older than me, which is always inspiring. Really, they were all good albergues. There were no pilgrims dinners because there weren't enough pilgrims that far on after Ribadeo. So
yeah, I think
interesting people though. Yeah.
I think one of the things, so if you've read about the Norte this year in particular, you have probably read a lot about bed crunches, that there have not been enough beds to go around. And that is a consequence of a lot of the albergues being shut down because of COVID, especially the Xunta albergues in Galicia, which of course from Ribadeo onward, you're fully in Galicia. And so there are a number of Xunta albergues along the way. I believe the Confraternity albergue in Miraz was shut down this year as well. So there were a number of, and last year. So there have been a number of closures. In a typical year, what I hear from pilgrims is that the albergue bed space is most at a crunch on the coast after Gijón up to closer to Ribadeo, in part because if you think about it from a business perspective, you want to have your albergue before the Primitivo splits off. And so if you have it just in a stage or two after that, you're taking a hit for sure. But you see more and more private albergues that have emerged in that stretch from Ribadeo onward, because then you're getting back into the range of pilgrims who can only do a week, being able to go through those areas. So there's more. In a typical year, the bed situation is okay there. The complicating factor now that I was grappling with when I was walking this past year is in Galicia in particular, they have added a lot more alternative routes now. For a long time, all of the alternative routes were really on the coast, but now there are a lot more on the interior. And some of these are really nice, like the walk from Mondoñedo, I am assured, is really quite spectacular. The views, I was ensconced in clouds all the way through, so I didn't get quite the benefit. But there are more and more alternatives that allow you to split and get maybe away from some of the pavement, have better views, but they're also potentially pulling you away from some of the beds. So like the well-liked tiny Donativo in Maris, Obisonte de Maris, is now on the route that is not quite as nice a walk. And there's one albergue that just opened this past year that is on one of those alternatives. And there's another albergue that is preparing to open. It's a bar now that is on the way to Sobrado, but it's going to open an albergue. So we are starting to see the emergence of more bed space on those alternatives. It has just been delayed by the pandemic.
Yes, lovely. Thank you. Okay, we have a few questions from Louise. First question is, to what extent do you need to plan ahead and even book accommodation in comparison to the Francés, where you don't need to plan if you don't want to?
Keys, did you book ahead?
I did frequently, particularly in San Sebastián and from there to Ribadeo, because of the number of tourists. And also I would find myself walking with friends, new friends, one of the great things about a Camino, and we would call ahead to get a place where we could all stay together.
This past year, it was essential, just because of the lack of bed space. And one of the most common things I heard from albergue owners this past year was you should book ahead, both to secure a bed and also because albergue owners, in some cases, were having to put in a lot of time trying to help bail out pilgrims who arrived when their albergue was full. And their albergue, they're hospitaleros, they're going to help. So it was challenging this past year. I would say that in July and August, you want to consider it, especially in certain stretches, and especially if you want to stay in certain towns. You need to pay attention to pinch points. So, for example, like a classic one for a long time was Pobena. Pobena is a town that lots of people stay in after Bilbao, and then there's like a long empty stretch. There's now another albergue along the way in Onton, but otherwise it's a long way to Castro Urdiales, where there's a small albergue. So there are certain stretches where if you don't plan ahead well, you're going to be in some trouble. But then there are other places where there are a lot of options. And then the question is just like, how comfortable are you and your budget with potentially having to shell out for a private room if the albergue is full? Or are you comfortable going 7 more kilometers to get to the next place with a bed? If you have budget flexibility and you can go and do 5 or 6 more kilometers, I think you're in a position where you can be more spontaneous in July and August. If you're not, then I think it's probably in your interest to try to plan ahead a day in those months. Outside of those months, it really just depends on how many pilgrims you have around you. Like he said, in June, he was alone a lot of the time. And so it wouldn't have been as essential for booking in pilgrim places that do allow reservations. But at other points, you might find yourself in with a clump, and it becomes more important to anticipate. So I have a hard time answering that question just because everyone's conditions or circumstances in walking are so varied. But I find that if you are distance and money flexible, then you can be way more flexible with your schedule.
This past summer, I did the Ingles and the Inverno, and I booked ahead every day. In fact, I booked ahead the last 4 days of the Inverno because it was difficult to find places.
I find that I book more these days, both because if I'm scouting, I'm walking long distances most of the time. And so I'm arriving at 4 or 5 in the afternoon, well after most pilgrims. And I'm also, often walking with groups of students. And so that is more complicated. And I know that I don't want to go off on a tangent here. This is like one of those, shoes or boots, one of those eternal grudge matches that you sink into, like, should you book or should you not book? I know that people who don't book are often adamantly opposed to it, and they point out spontaneity is the reason. I find I am way more spontaneous as a pilgrim when I book beds, because I don't walk with any consideration of where am I going to sleep that night. I don't feel any urgency to get to the town. I feel like I can do absolutely anything I want all day because I have a bed, and then I can adjust accordingly. But again, that's an eternal grudge match. So we should probably move on to another Norte specific question.
That's a very good point, though. Yes, spontaneity comes from more than one place, I guess, and the decisions that you make about your Camino. Louise also asks, how many days normally, on average, would you say, for the Norte?
Keys, how many days did you take again?
I walked 41 days and took 6 rest days, 2 of them in San Sebastián. I had planned 1 in advance, and when I got there, I knew I needed 2.
Which is fantastic, right? Like if you have the time to spare, then you can break it up in all kinds of different ways, and there are some lovely places to spend time. So in the book, we have 32 stages. I think that is doable for a number of pilgrims, but it's not doable for some. And one of the things I've noticed over the last however many years that I've been engaged in pilgrimage conversations It seems like when I started, 25 kilometers was more of the average, and it feels like it's ticking down more towards 20 kilometers, just among the people who are really active in pilgrim forums. And so if that's you, if you're someone who is just happier doing 15 to 20 kilometers, then it's going to take longer. So, I think our guide is predicated more at around 25 kilometers per day as an average. And that's, again, 32 stages, and that's without days off. So if you have 5 weeks, you're going to be really happy with it. If 25 kilometers is good, if you have 40 days, that's going to give you more flexibility, both in terms of off days or having some shorter days. I think it's so important to know who you are as a walker as best you can. And once you've done, most people come into the Norte having done the Francés, you have a pretty good read on it. Like, the first week of the Norte is harder than the first week of the Francés. And so you need to be prepared for that. But after that, it smooths out considerably. And so if you can take it a little bit easier in that first week and you were okay on the Francés, then you can probably anticipate equivalent pacing from there.
Nice. And Louise's final question is, are there albergues all along the route or mainly at the end of the traditional stages? She's thinking of maybe not sticking to the stages that are prescribed in websites or guidebooks or whatever.
Yeah. By the way, thank you, Louise. You're the MVP. Keys, can you think of some in-between places you stopped or albergues that were notable to you that maybe weren't at the stage endpoints?
Yes, I couldn't name all of them now, although you showed a photo of Itzarbe, which was something of a long, long barn full of beds, and the only place on any Camino that my boots have ever been taken mistakenly by someone else. And it turned out it was a couple I was having breakfast with that morning. We discovered it halfway through the day. I was off the stages quite a bit of the Norte, and actually only stayed in hotels in a few of the cities. So there were plenty of albergues along the way, and they were everyone was a treasure because it was a pilgrim's home. Everyone there was a pilgrim, and before COVID, of course, we had pilgrim dinners, and everyone shared. You made new friends every day. So all I can say is there are plenty of albergues along the way. A lot of them are listed in your guidebook. The others you can find on Granze and such sites as that.
Yeah, it's let me just pause here and say, this is in the introduction to the book, and nobody ever reads the introduction, or a very small percentage of people actually read the introduction. On behalf of all guidebook writers everywhere who have stages in their books, we are not telling you to follow those stages. Those are an organizational tool. There's some advantages maybe to going in certain orders, but please feel free to customize, feel free to break up your walk in the manner that makes sense to you. There's no moral judgment being offered by the guidebook writer that this is exactly the right and correct way to do the pilgrimage. So yes, there are many albergues along the way. Sometimes I find that people encounter things that were written about the Camino del Norte 20 years ago, and it still shows up in like the search engine results pretty high. And so among those, it's like the whole thing is on pavement, and there aren't enough albergues. There's not much of a pilgrim infrastructure. The waymarks are unreliable. Okay, the waymarks are reliable. There are plenty of albergues in non-pandemic times. And the pavement situation, there certainly still are some stretches with a good amount of pavement, in the same way that there are on pretty much every other pilgrimage route. It's inevitable when you're passing in and out of towns. But if you do track the alternative options along the way, you really can save yourself a lot of pavement throughout. So most of those opinions are pretty dated at this point.
Yeah, absolutely. We have a couple more minutes and we have 3 more questions. Let's try it and get these guys' answers. We have first question from Pearl. She's asking where to get stamps for the pilgrim passport if the churches are locked.
Well, some are open, and then you have albergues, you have bars. Those are the easiest, and tourism offices. There are a lot more tourism offices because of the tourists. So you can get lost stamps in there.
Absolutely. And I guess places of accommodation as well, yeah.
Yeah.
Helen has always carried her own pack on Caminos in France and Spain. Now she's getting a bit older. She's asking about pack transport systems.
Correos, the Spanish postal service, offers their pack transport service all the way along the Norte. There are some private providers as well. So yes, absolutely on the Norte, you can do that.
Great. And last question then from Pearl again. The many alternative routes along the route, are they waymarked with shells as well, generally?
Some of them are waymarked with shells and yellow arrows. Some of them are waymarked with the red and white stripes common to other GRs and long distance routes across Europe, because that is often the coastal variant is in the E9. So you'll see red and white stripes as the alternatives in those cases. And there are some routes that aren't marked, like the Santander variant. And so those situations, you have either instructions in the book, or you can download GPS tracks to help guide you through. But those are much rarer.
How did you find it, Keys? Were there always waymarks for you on the digitals?
I have a wonderful habit of missing arrows, and they always take me to some special place. So I take it as blessings. But everywhere that I walked on the Norte was reasonably well marked. I didn't get lost for lack of arrows. I got lost for not paying attention.
You often have a wonderful navigational aid. It's called the ocean.
Mm-hmm.
That's right. And another thing, in 2019, there was a terrible, terrible heat wave in Spain. But on the Norte, we were protected by the mountains, and it was a wonderful walk all the way. Yeah.
Fantastic. All right, I think that is the end of the questions. We've got them all done. Yes, we're just past 8 o'clock. So I think that is all that we have time for today, sadly. Thank you so much to all of you for joining us today. I hope it's been useful. I've definitely felt inspired to get back out there at the earliest possibility. And of course, a huge thank you to Keys, and a massive thank you to Dave for your expertise, your generous time, your fabulous presentation, your enthusiasm. Yes, very infectious. Thank you so much for doing this for us. We will soon be announcing.
I thought after COVID, we wouldn't use infectious as a compliment anymore.
Oh, you're right.
I appreciate that.
Yeah. I'll amend my statement.
I would love to be one of your history students.
Sorry to interrupt.
Yes. Keys.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. Wish you were my history teacher. We will soon be announcing further dates for Camino Masterclasses coming in 2022, including sessions on the Camino Portugués, the Camino Inglés, and the Via de la Plata. To stay in the know, sign up for our monthly e-newsletter at the bottom of our website homepage at caminopilgrim.org. In the meantime, thank you so much again. Thank you for joining us. See you soon. Stay safe, and buen camino.
Buen camino.